questioning, and this has led to problems, you know? They may not make sense, they may not be conducive to our well-being or how we live our lives. And so being philosophical is allowing ourselves to ask questions, to not be dogmatic, so that your belief is not in control of you, that you are autonomously choosing whatever belief that you're holding at that time, right? And that's going to take a certain degree of a certain psychological apparatus to have self-awareness, to comprehend the things we think and what we believe. And so that's part of what it means to be philosophical, right? But at the same time, how we live our lives, when we go back to the definition of philosophy as love of wisdom, well-being, we could say, is a very wise thing to have. How, like, having meaning in life, right? And our purposes and our goals, and the reduction of suffering to whatever degree is realistic. Suffering is part of the human condition, and some philosophers like Schopenhauer kind of like, you know, I don't know, almost take it as like a point of meaning, but I would say that's contrary. I'm going to argue against Schopenhauer. I'm going to say it's contrary to what human existence really is. And we can see evidence of that in some ways by the way that we function, right? Like the psychological state of flow really only happens when we're in psychologically safe environments, right? If you're in an employment context where it's abusive or you don't feel that you can freely communicate your ideas, it's very difficult for you to think. Your limbic system becomes activated. You're in a fight or flight kind of a context, right? And so these things are also conducive to well-being. And so I would say that it's part of philosophy. A lot of philosophers will disagree with me, and they'll say there's a difference between what we ought to be doing and descriptively what we are doing. But that might be the part of the problem, is that we're missing that. And so part of my research for the past like 15 years, academically and through case studies and a whole bunch of other things, is to figure out what it would mean, what living a good life really means, and what that makes, how that relates to our well-being and the problems of mental health and mental illness, looking at the DSM and understanding what these different disorders are, and how we could create a social context that responds to those problems of mental health, right? Such that maybe just the way that we relate to each other makes us healthier. You know, maybe it could just be easy, like a turbine in a river that's generating electricity, right? Maybe the way that we communicate, or we've learned to communicate, what our values are, our awareness of our values, those things can help us with our promotion of our well-being, and then respond to treating any mental illness if it does exist. So for example, there's a book called Feeling Good. And in that book, David Burns, a psychiatrist, he was a student of Aaron Beck, who developed cognitive behavioral therapy. And the thesis is basically that sometimes we have errors in the way that we perceive things, or what we say to ourselves, our self-talk, right? And our perception is like a psychological process, you could say, like awareness, what kind of data we're focusing on. But then our self-talk is statements. And that's where, again, we can be very philosophical, going back to that conceptual analysis stuff. And so part of the problem is that we have a tendency to be distorted in the way that we see things. It's like looking in the hall of mirrors in the amusement park. You know, an apple will look all big or all funny looking and stuff like that, right? And it's not representative of really what the apple is. It's just our perception of it in that moment. And so David Burns said the consequence of being very distorted in the way we think or how we see the world, our cognitions, is that it can give rise to destructive anger. It can give rise to things like depression. And then there's extreme consequences from that. It can give rise to procrastination, problems of motivation, right? Our expectations of ourselves and others. And so fundamentally, if we can, you can read this yourself and it'll make improvements. The very first page of the book says that 70% of people that read the book are almost cured of depression, which is an insane statistic. It's like, okay, let's, you know, and so that's the reason why I'm, you know, we could say teaching it, but really exploring and trying to understand what the meaning of this is, right, together with people, Because part of my thesis in the philosophy of mental health is that it's not something you can do alone. You grew with people, and if you're fucked up, in some ways they may have fucked you up a little bit too. Not that they intended to do that, it's just that they maybe lack the skill or the awareness, or some situational factor happened, which also contributes to maybe a lack of awareness or whatever, right? And so the only way, in my understanding, for us to solve the problem of mental illness, however we conceptualize that, is to socialize each other, which means that we value at a deep emotional and the way that you live your life level certain ways of being and understanding. So if we just flip to page 42 really quick,